Yeah, well, too, yeah. Yeah.
How was that? All right. Good evening, everybody. And after a short turnaround from last Friday's meeting, those of you who were here, thank you for coming out. How many were here last Friday? Anybody? Ooh, good number of you. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I was away. My wife and I always travel during teachers' convention, so that this last weekend was no exception. So yeah, this is our second meeting of the month.
No. Yeah, sorry, you might click on click in here. Oop, I screwed it up for you.
Right. Oh, click in there.
Okay.
And
then the key should work now.
Oh, I see. So click on that. Okay.
Unless I lied to you. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So our typical agenda is our thank you to our sponsors. Talk about a little bit, just for brief, what's new in the Java community. I have here introduced Brian, but I'm actually going to introduce one of our regular members here. So he's going to do a lightning talk. And from what I understand, it was at the encouragement of Bruno Sousa, who was here last Friday. So that's awesome.
It was strong.
So, oh, it was. All right. So yeah. So that's cool. So yes, so I look forward to hearing that. And then after Mary's done, then I'll introduce Brian, and then we'll get going with the presentation. And then at the end, I'll come back and talk about what's coming up. We already have January booked. We may have May booked already, but more details later. And we'll have our giveaway of IntelliJ IDEA license and also one of the coveted micro profile hoodies. So which some of the folks here have already won over the last few months. Our platinum sponsor is JFrog, the DevOps company, so check them out. They've been very supportive of our efforts over the past 3 years. Azul is our silver sponsor. And of course, they make their own downstream distribution of the OpenJDK, which happens to have the coordinated restore at checkpoint, or otherwise known as CRAC, but not CRACK, but CRAC. I always found that funny that they would actually let that happen. DevNexus is our partner, and DevNexus will be coming up April 9th through 11th in Atlanta next year. The call for papers has been closed. Fingers crossed, mine gets accepted. We'll see. And okay, I didn't know that, Barry. Cool. And our per meeting sponsors is JetBrains, of course. They are the ones who make IntelliJ IDEA, and Jakarta E and the Eclipse Foundation, who provide hosting on their Crowdcast platform. We've used them in the past, so they offer that to all the Java groups. So they're definitely, one of our per meeting sponsors. So what's new? Peloton 4 came out right at the end of last month, and you might be saying, well, so what? It is actually a big deal because their new web server now was built from scratch, rebuilt from scratch using all virtual threads, and they call it Helidon Nema. And so that is, something that developers can take advantage of. JHipster 8 was released as well. Matt Rabel, who was here last month, is one of the developers, for that project. It involves a number of different technologies. And then we have JDK enhancement proposals, or JEPs, that have been targeted for JDK 22, which is scheduled to come out in March of next year. So you can see those 4 there. JEP 459, the review is supposed to conclude tomorrow. So I'll look for the email saying that it's been targeted, because it goes through a review process in the proposal phase. So that'll be 4. And the feature set's going to be frozen by December 5th, December 8th, something like that, early December. Okay, so I'll leave that there for now. But do you have a presentation, Mary? I mean, do you need the? Oh, okay. So
you can hide my ugly mug and close that. And
no, this is the ugly mug here. I'll let you figure.
Oh, yeah. All right.
So all right. So without further ado, Mary Coker, right? Who's been a regular for quite some time, will be here and give a lightning talk. So. Oh yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, it needs to be in the camera. That's true. Want the? Yeah, you put it on your lapel there.
that good? Okay. All right, we're ready? All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Coker, and I'm a software engineer. I'm going to talk about the power of community, how going to meetups and having a beer at the bar can push your career to the next level. How did I come up with this topic? Well, this past Friday, we had a bonus meeting with Bruno and Vinicius presenting. If you weren't able to see that, I highly recommend you go and see the recorded session. So Bruno commented at the beginning, why is everybody sitting so far apart from each other? And I thought, yeah, I've been coming to meetings, but not really networking lately. So I made a point of sticking around afterwards. Unplanned, we decided as we were leaving to go to a bar. And at the end of our time there, as I went to enter my car to go home, I hear a voice call out, Mary, you are going to do a 5-minute presentation at the meeting on Tuesday. So I said, okay. So here I am. Let me tell you a little bit about that time at the bar. There, the four of us with various unique experiences and perspectives, sharing our stories, asking questions, laughing, and just really enjoying each other's company. Everyone was at ease. This seemed like just a few people hanging out, but actually it was much more. It was true networking and relationship building. During our discussion, I mentioned how I love getting to know people. I love knowing the overall picture and how I feel I can do my job better when I'm included in those meetings. However, many times I'm not. For the code portion, I work better in complete silence so I can concentrate. So I mentioned how I was thinking of looking for a remote position so I could work in the best environment for me to do that. I have a social life outside of my job. My job doesn't need to fulfill that part. Bruno said, yes, but why? You love socializing, being with people, and knowing the larger picture. So why are you looking for a remote job where you're not doing all of that? You should be doing something like this. I said, well, I do get to socialize at times. I love when I get a big project to run. I get to reach out to all levels and departments and gather the necessary information. But yeah, is there something better? So now in his talk on Friday, he said, you can learn and practice, but to truly gain a skill, you have to do it. Do it over and over until you can do it without thinking. So my mentor has me here today taking action. Here I am. Going to the bar built those true organic connections. Now it's too soon to know all the ways that night will push my career to the next level, but I got a mentor. I have new friends who now know a little bit more about me, and I them, our likes, concerns, interests, stories, a push to do a presentation and an opportunity to help master that skill. And we each now have increased our visibility and reach. So I embrace every opportunity to make an authentic connection. Those connections may be able to unlock doors you never even knew existed. My favorite memories usually involve the people I connected with along the way. Networking can be done anywhere with anyone. Great conversations, ideas, and leads come from having a drink at the bar. I left with ideas, a greater sense of direction, increased energy and excitement, and a greater focus on what I needed to do. More importantly, I made friends. I also got to know more about Vinicius and the social aspects of his work at Amazon. We also got to bond over the occasional karaoke burst that seemed to come out of nowhere during our conversation. We all talked about the days of Sun Microsystems. Barry and I about our highlight moment at Java Tech Days, also called Java 1 in New York City, all the way back in 2004. Past, present, work, social, all parts of our lives blended together. It was a great night. I also noticed a technology manager at Amazon looked at my LinkedIn profile the next morning in stealth mode. Does it mean anything? Who knows? But as we put ourselves out there, we become more visible. Just remember, great conversations, ideas, and leads come from having a drink at the bar. And you never know just how it may push your career to the next level. So anyone want to grab a drink after the meeting? Microphone?
Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, so, well, a couple of things I want to say, I've met Bruno for the first time in 2019 at Code One. And luckily, even though I didn't get to see him last Friday, I did see him in September at the special New York Java SIG and Garden State Java Group combined hosting of the JCP Executive Committee. So that was fun. He was there. And I understand his parrot came out too. So, but I wanted to say yes, absolutely. The Java community, I know for you young folks, just getting involved, the Java community is just filled with just so many wonderful people. It's just great to be part of it. Just what Mary was saying. And that's what really, when she was talking about all that, and that's what made me think about all the people, that you may have corresponded with on email, but then you get to meet them in person, things like that. And it's really cool, especially at conferences. Well, enough of that on me. I want to introduce Brian. Oh, is it? Oh, it's already.
Well, unless you have.
Oh, I don't know. Is it?
Go. Well,
Yes, it's projecting here, but it may not be projecting.
oh, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
okay.
think it's out of the, yep. Here we go.
No, wait, thank you. We'll just leave it there. Perfect, thanks. So we're happy to have Brian Demers. Did I say that correct? Demers. Okay,
It's all good.
I screwed it up last month when I was talking about what our upcoming events, and Matt Rabel corrected me right away. So he's a developer advocate at Gradle and a PMC member for Apache Shiro project, and that was mentioned last month, by the way, during Matt's presentation. He spends much of his time contributing to open source software projects in the form of writing code, tutorials, blogs, and answering questions. Along with typical software development, Brian also has a passion for fast builds and automation. And then away from the keyboard, Brian is a beekeeper. Well, that's always fun. And can likely be found playing board games. And you can find him at Twitter at Brian Demers.
Demers. It's okay.
I'll get it right.
Now you're second guessing, right? Now it's.
So anyways, it's a pleasure to meet you. So,
Thank you. You
thanks
too,
for
yeah.
coming out here to rural New Jersey. So,
Yeah.
And so without further ado.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, I have one. I
Okay,
think.
great. You want this one back?
All right. I'm gonna. Let's see if I the right screen here. I'll get Zoom out of the way. Oop. Hold on. Come on. The beauty, the joys of multiple screens.
Isn't it wonderful?
All right. All right. I think that's as good as it's going to get for Zoom here. It's probably in windowed mode, but I don't dare to go back. So can everyone see that? Everything looks good? Oh, no, the Zoom thing is right in the, yeah, hold on. There we go. It's amazing that how many times we've done these types of things, and screen sharing is still a problem in every single meeting. All right, so I'm still not happy with how that looks, but I think it's as good as it's getting. All right, thanks for having me. I want to echo comments from Mary. I know most of the jobs that I've had were from my network, right? So it's definitely important to grow your network and keep in touch with your past coworkers. It's very, very important for your career. All right. So today I'm going to talk about developer productivity engineering. I'm We're gonna talk about what it is and specifically what's in it for us Java developers. We're good? All right, you want to start over? We're good? All right, we're going. It's all good. All right, so software development is a craft, right? It's a creative activity. Does anyone remember their first Hello World application? Some of you? Okay, so I think, this is fuzzy memory stuff, but I think mine was a Windows command line prompt. I just changed the name of the prompt. I think I made it say something like, Brian is awesome, right? So I got a big kick out of this. I'm pretty sure I added some sort of infinite loop afterwards. And this was back in the days of, shared computers. My sisters were not impressed. I thought it was great, but it probably locked up the computer, but that's a whole other story. But the feedback you get from that simple Hello World application is instant, right? Maybe you do something wrong, it fails, but it fails right away. But your brain gets a sudden hit of dopamine, right? And you're excited and you're on to do the next thing. So you want to try something else. Again, I made, say, Brian is awesome. And then the next thing I tried was making a loop, right? So you iterate, but it's very fast feedback, okay? So fast forward to today. Now, would we expect the next generation of software developers to put up the same amount of crap that we do on a day-to-day basis, right? Long builds, flaky tests, those things, right? We would not expect these kids to do that. So why do we put up with it? All right. So I already got a great introduction. Thank you. So I live up in New Hampshire. So that's where I have my bees and I don't know, I've lived there for most of my life now at this point. I'm originally from Maine, so I've stayed, all in New England. I like this area. But I've been in and around the Java world pretty much my whole career, specifically in the area of application security and build tools, right? Now, those two things seem like opposite ends of the spectrum, or they don't seem related at all until you realize, your builds probably need some security too. They connect to the internet. Does anyone have a build that does not connect to the internet? Nobody? Every once in a while, there's one person. But your build probably connects to the internet through something on your corporate network, or maybe you deploy packages, right? Or publish packages. You need some security there. That's security is how I get involved with both of these worlds. All right, so let's play a little game, right? So everyone's gonna laugh or everyone's gonna hate me, one or the other. So raise your hand if you like tabs. Okay, a couple, all right, and spaces? All right, we're kind of split in the middle here. Maybe tabs might have a slight edge. All right, here's another one. So dogs? Ooh, cats? Oh, wow, okay. Normally I'm gonna say, I'm biased, but I think that dogs usually have it, but this is a cat crowd. So this is my dog, Zemo. He just turned 2. He's got the cone of shame on right now. He had, the typical surgeries that dogs go through around this time in their lives. But he also had like a small hernia, a bunch of stuff. It's all expected. He's doing very well, but he's got the cone, and it's been, I haven't walked in a couple of weeks because he hasn't walked in a couple of weeks. And this is just some random cat photo I found on the internet. All right, so one more. So who here is a fan of Gradle Build Tool? All right, and Maven. All right, so we're kind of split in the middle here. Maybe Maven might have a slight edge. Okay, so if you're paying attention to a couple slides ago, I prominently featured Maven, but I work at the company Gradle, so what gives? So this talk is not about Gradle, but there is this elephant in the room I need to point out. So Gradle, the company who I work for, created Gradle Build Tool, and that's what we typically think of when we hear the term Gradle, right? We also have this product called Develocity, and that's all about making your builds faster, and that works with Gradle Build Tool, Maven, Bazel, SBT. Anyway, it's a long way of saying we don't care which build tool you're using as long as you're productive. So that's why they're paying me to talk about productivity. All right, so here's a fun one. Who has heard the term developer joy? 1, 2, that's sad, right? That's terrible. Okay, so I think the best code is written by happy developers. Hopefully you agree, but even if I'm not writing better code, that's some subjective term, I feel like I'm more productive, right? Like I'm excited to share the code with people. My attention span is held by the code I'm working on. So it's these things that make me feel like I'm writing better code. I'm more engaged, right? So a a lot of the practices that we have in modern software development kind of suck the joy from this process. So let's ask another question. So who likes to write code? Okay, so most of the time everyone raises their hand, and then I flipped the script here. Who likes to write code at work? Right? Yeah, okay, so Barry here, because he's that's that. I don't know if you're the typical, yeah. but so a lot of people put their hand down, right? And it's because it's a lot of the frustrations we deal with at work. So we love to write code, and it's questionable whether we like to write it at work. So we want to make this process more enjoyable. All right, so another question. Who is working on a code base that is shrinking? Nobody. Okay. Every once in a while, there's someone in the back of the room with like an ear-to-ear grin, and they're super happy, and they're like, like Horseshack in the back, right? It's like one person gets that. Okay, I appreciate that. So, I love deleting code. It's one of my favorite things. But most of the time, our code bases are growing. The number of developers we work with are growing. Number of repositories, lines of code, the diversity of the stacks and frameworks you work on, right? Those things are getting more complicated. So a number of years ago, I worked at a big shop, or bigger shop, I should say, and we had this big engineering all-hands meeting. And everyone got together in an auditorium, and one of the talking points was 1 million lines of code had been added to the code base in the last year. Okay, there was 2 types of people in that room. Like the junior developers were cheering, they were very excited, and the senior developers, we were all kind of like, oh, right? Now, 1 million lines of code added isn't necessarily good or isn't necessarily bad, but it does highlight we need more effective ways of dealing with our code base. Okay, so let's pretend this is your schedule, all right? Your calendar for the day. I'm gonna wave a magic wand and I'm gonna remove all the meetings, okay? So, right. So there's still some potential problems here. Okay, so I'm going to start today and I'm going to work on a small feature. I think it's going to take a couple hours to fix. Okay, so I get coding. I'm in my IDE. I'm in kind of the flow state, right? I'm in the zone. My brain is happy. I'm excited. After a couple hours working pretty much mostly in my IDE, I'm going to start thinking about submitting a pull request or submitting that code to my team, right? So maybe I run a full build. And maybe that takes a little while. Maybe something fails right away. That's not necessarily bad, as long as I get the feedback pretty quick. But eventually something may fail and it may take a little while longer, right? And I kind of get out of this flow state because now I'm starting to troubleshoot things that I didn't know I was changing, or I didn't know how that was going to affect my code, or maybe it was just some weird build error, right? So now I'm kind of out of the zone. Maybe I have to ask a teammate for help and wait. I go to lunch, all right, I come back, maybe I got an answer from my team, maybe it's just, a fresh set of eyes, I look at it after lunchtime, whatever it is, I'm back in the zone, right? I'm coding for an hour or so, and then I've got the thing wrapped up, I submit my pull requests, now I'm gonna wait for CI, right? Nobody on my team is gonna look at my pull request until that thing goes green, so I'm just waiting, right? CI fails though. There was some weird flaky test that now I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I don't know if it was related to my change or if it's just some issue in our code base. Anyway, I'm frustrated, right? It's the end of the day. I'm trying to get things done. I got to go home, right? Anyway, we all have kind of experiences like this. This is exaggerated, of course, but we all have experiences like this, and it's frustrating, and we owe ourselves more than this. Okay, so I hate the term 10x developer. I really do. I can go on a rant about it after this if you want, but I really like this quote. So it's basically the bottlenecks in our tool chains are holding us back. So this is true at Dell, and it's probably true where you work too. Has anyone seen this before? You write code about an hour a day? Anyone? Oh, good. Yeah, so I've heard this quote a number of times over the years, and every time my brain rejects it, and then after it rejects it, I spend the next 4 hours in a meeting, right? So my brain is actively pushing against this, but let's just, this is somebody's statistics, so let's play with this for a minute. So if this is true, you work about an hour, well, I shouldn't say you work, you write code, you're doing other work. You write code about an hour a day, right? So that's about 230 days a year you work, factoring holidays, vacations, weekends, give or take. Right, so that means you roughly write code for 230 hours at work. Let's say you're super productive and you double this number, right? That's still less than 500 hours a year that you're writing code for your job, okay? Let's assume this is true. You need to make those hours as productive and hopefully as enjoyable as possible. So that's what we like to call developer productivity engineering, right? We're championing this way to make this better. So DPE uses straightforward techniques to foster developer success and happiness, right? Success and happiness, this is like the perfect pairing in my book. So basically DPE emphasizes three things. So fast feedback cycles, which I've kind of talked about a little bit, tool chain reliability, right? We want to get rid of that flakiness, and actionable data. We want to make sure whatever data we can get out of the system, we can use to then make our builds even faster and be more productive. So making developers' jobs more enjoyable is also a way of retaining talent. Anyone ever leave a job because it was draining? No one wants to admit it. All right, a couple heads shaking, yeah. But so some people think, oh, we can't do this, right? We're not Netflix, right? So the quote, this quote is reused everywhere, is where do you think Netflix gets its developers from, right? A company like yours, your company can do these things. You can make changes. All right, this is everyone's favorite comic, right? Sort of. Everyone's seen this, I hope. So we can all relate to this, right? You start a build, and then it's going to take a while, so you have to go do something else. So maybe it's not sword fighting, maybe it's ping pong or foosball. I worked at a shop, we played a lot of foosball. But you're doing something else. It's probably email or Slack or whatever, right? Or worse, like filling out some sort of expense report. But there's new research from a few years ago that basically says frequent context switching leads to cognitive fatigue, right? And everyone's kind of been burnt out over the last few years, right? Through COVID and everything. Early in my career, I literally bragged about being a good multitasker. I put it on my resume. It's utter bullshit, right? It really is. But I don't know if people like to read it, or maybe I thought they liked to read it on my resume. But let's, the research says it takes about 10 minutes every time you switch tasks to be productive again, right? And if you switch away, you have to switch back, so you're paying that cost twice. So let's give an example here. So let's pretend I have a 15-minute build and I'm working on a feature, right? So I'm going to start the build and then I'm going to go check my email. So that's one context switch. I'm going to do my email for half an hour or so, right? I have a bunch of emails to get through. I got to, answer questions, whatever it is. So I do that, and then I'm going to switch back to my code base and check on that build. So that's context switch number 2. My build actually failed 2 minutes in because I missed something. Maybe a simple compiler error, maybe the test failure, whatever it was. I fixed that, right? And then I start to build again, and then I go back to doing whatever it was, email, Slack, yada, 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 right? And then eventually I'm going to come back and check on that build. So that's potentially 4 context switches just because my build is long. Again, this is a little exaggerated, but I do this type of thing all the time, all right? So I don't know about you, but I would much rather spend my time writing code than checking my email. All right, so over on the left here, right, whichever way that is, your left, my right, the one that makes the L, I think. Over on the left, so we have a developer and he's surrounded by little loops. Those are all feedback loops, right? So when you're in your IDE, you're editing code, maybe you get the little red squiggly line, right? That is awesome, actually. So that is instant feedback. Sometimes it's actually before you even type the variable, right? But it's instant feedback. So that's as good as it gets. Maybe you run a single test or something through your IDE. That's also great. You should get feedback right away. But sometimes you run a test or run a build, it takes a long time, right? And it gets you out of your flow state. Or sometimes something fails and you have no idea why, right? So this is a problem. And every developer on your team deals with these things. So this is what DPE tries to solve. Okay, so this is kind of productivity through the years, right? Through the decades. So in the 70s and 80s, there was a big focus on just-in-time manufacturing. We wanted to have less products sitting on our shelves. We want to put that product to use as soon as possible, make sure we're getting some revenue for it. In the 90s, there was a big focus on change management. How did a process affect our organization, right? And then software eats the world in the 2000s, right? So this is kind of where my career started. There's a big focus on agile and lean. Early in my career, I remember spending weeks and months on requirements docs, right? And usually we just threw them out and ignored them afterwards and then scrambled at the last minute to try to make everything look good. We don't do that anymore, right? We're kind of iteratively working on these docs. And then in comes DevOps, right? So it helps us deploy our software, ship our code. So I think DevOps is a solved problem, right? And I say that joking. It's a very hard problem. But as an industry, we kind of know what we're doing, right? So the next big bottleneck is the developer. And it's not that developers are slow. It's all the crap that we've been putting up with. All right. Career-wise is also interesting too. We've seen, especially at big shops, the rise of kind of productivity teams. Some teams have, some companies have these dedicated teams. We've seen developers move from titles like DevOps engineers to SREs to platform engineers to productivity engineers. So it's not just about managing CI servers. A big part of this is making sure developers aren't working on frustrating tools or flaky builds. Okay, so is anyone surveying their developers or doing surveys at your company? A couple of head nods. Yeah, so you should absolutely be doing this if you're not already. Probably too many meetings is number one on the list, but a point I like to make is it's really hard to improve something if you don't have any data, right? So if you have too many meetings, you need to start telling people, you need to start collecting that. But if your builds are too slow, right, you need to start figuring that out too. All right, so let's talk about feedback cycles. Interesting things happen when you focus on feedback cycles. So I talked about idle time, right, and context switching. So if your builds are fast, you're getting feedback fast, you have less idle time. Okay, that one's obvious. That means you have less context switching. So we talked about that. That's going to make you more focused. So hopefully a more focused developer is writing higher quality software. So that should improve the quality as well. But then across the bottom here, we're going to have frequent builds. So this means your change sets can be smaller, right? So we're no longer cramming as much stuff in our change sets as possible. We can do atomic commits, right? I've worked at places where the feedback loop has been a couple hours. So you cram as much stuff as possible into every change, right? Every change set. I'm going to fix the bug that I'm working on. I'm going to update some dependencies. I'm going to fix some typos. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to cram it all in there and try to get all that reviewed at once because I don't want to do this, go through the hassle of a 2-hour cycle. So now my change sets are smaller. My pull requests are easier to review. So if you send me a pull request that is 10 lines of code, I'm going to review it right away. If you send me one that's 10,000 lines of code, I'm going to put that thing off until absolute, the latest possible. Hopefully someone else on my team will pick it up. So I used to joke about this 10,000 line, this fictitious 10,000 line pull request, and I literally got one a month ago. Okay, it was a beautiful change. It was really good. It was well thought out, but it's 10,000 lines, right? There was 7,500 lines added and 2,500 removed, right? Human brain can't do that, right? But anyway, it was a great change. It went in. There was no issues, but still, I put it off as long as possible. But we're gonna have fewer merge conflicts, right? Things are gonna be easier to get in. When there are problems, it's easier to roll back. Troubleshooting is more efficient because I have smaller change sets. All of these things just because of fast feedback. Right, here's another example. I forget the name of the company that this came from, but this is real world data. So it's basically two teams working at this company. One team has 11 developers. The other one has about half, so 6 developers. Team 1 has a 4-minute build, which seems quick, right? It only seems quick. The other one has a build of 1 minute. Team 2 is actually able to build way more frequently. So technically, if you do the math out, Team 2 is 80% less idle than Team 1. Now, granted, Team 1 is not just sitting there waiting for their builds for those 4 minutes, but we've talked about context switching. We've talked about all this other stuff. So you can see where this is going. Team 2 is able to get more feedback, and they're able to make all kinds of changes, decisions based on that feedback. All right, so what do we do about this in our code bases? So I'm going to give you 4 kind of things you can think about. I'm going to go over each one of these in a couple slides in a minute here, but let's go around this circle real quick. So first up is build cache. Anyone heard of build cache? Okay, a couple people. All right, I'll get to this in a minute too. But basically, if you're building an application and something is slow, one of the first tools we go to is some sort of caching. So we really need to start treating our builds like we do our applications. So you can talk about build caching in a minute. The next up is predictive test selection. So this is a tricky one. This one still kind of boggles my mind a little bit, but I get the idea here. So it's all about avoiding work, right? I'll come back to this one in a minute. It's really interesting. So third on the list is test distribution. So again, if you have an application that has to do a lot of work, what do? You distribute the load, right? So again, we need to do this with our builds. And then monitoring. Anyone have an application in production that you do not monitor? Nobody's willing to raise their hand? I wouldn't either. It's a habit. I know a few people that have apps in production that don't monitor them. But again, we monitor our applications. Why don't we monitor our builds, right? So I'll talk about this in a minute too. All right, so build cache. If you do nothing else, I think turning on a build cache for your builds is probably your biggest bang for the buck. So build cache is not the same as a dependency cache. So for Maven folks, maybe you have a corporate Nexus or Artifactory instance on your network, and you're kind of caching artifacts as they enter your corporate network. And then maybe you can think about it again in your M2 home directory or wherever Gradle puts it. You basically have a whole bunch of jars sitting on your disk and on your hard drive. So that's all about network I/O, right? We're caching, we're saving for the network I/O. Build cache is all about CPU optimization, right? We want to avoid doing CPU intensive tasks that we've already done before. So specifically compilation, testing, those types of things. So Gradle Build Tool introduced this feature in 2017. Apache Maven has a build cache that was released about a year ago. Develocity, the product I work on, we also have a build cache for Maven, and we support the other build cache. Anyway, so there's a couple build cache options for Maven. There's some nuanced differences between the two, and I can answer questions about that later. But at a high level, all of these build caches kind of do the same thing. And there's 2 ways to use a build cache, both local and remote. So local build cache is if I run a build on my machine, I'm going to put cache on my machine to make my builds faster. And remote build cache typically is going to be populated by my CI servers, and then I'm going to download those cache entries. So now my whole team's builds can be fast. So from a high level, how does it work? So every task or goal has a set of inputs, right? So think about compilation for a minute. So if you're going to compile source, you have those source files. You have a bunch of dependencies. You have the compiler version, a bunch of arguments, those types of things. And then you have outputs. So in the case of compilation, you have class files. In the case of running tests, you have a test report or coverage data, right? So for the same set of inputs, you would expect the same set of outputs. So this is critical here, because if neither one of those is stable, then you can't cache it, right? So essentially, we take those inputs and we just hash them, and we generate a cache key, and then we associate that key with basically a zip file of everything that that was output by that goal. So again, you have a bunch of class files from compilation, you zip them up, you store them off to the side, use them later. Next time you get the same inputs, you just extract the zip file instead of running the CPU intensive task. All right. Sure. Yeah, so that would invalidate the cache. So you'd have to recompile. Yep, yeah. All this is all transparent to you. Yep, so remote cache, you save about half the time we've seen in Dell has seen about 40%, 41% time savings. The open source project Kotlin, sponsored by JetBrains, typically sees a 60 to 70% increase in their build speeds because of caching. Half of those times are due to remote caching. Has anyone heard of reproducible builds? Nobody? Okay, this is my favorite thing to talk about. Unfortunately, it's just this one slide. I love this idea. Okay, so basically, the TLDR here is a reproducible build is a set of practices that makes it possible to build your software multiple times and get the same output, typically byte for byte. Okay, so this is seen from a security perspective as a good move because if you build a jar and you send it to me and I have access to the source, I can rebuild that. And if I get the same jar, I know you didn't stick anything malicious in that jar. Now, intentionally, or maybe there was malware on your machine, right? It's a good move for security. But in order to do this, you have the same inputs and the same outputs, right? So now we have a practice that is both good for security and good for productivity. Most of the time, things that are good for security are not good for productivity. Now, I wish that wasn't necessarily always true, but it often is. So I love reproducible builds. So if you haven't heard this, definitely check it out. All right, so the next up is this predictive test selection. Now, the premise here is if I change a single source file, chances are good I don't need to run all my tests, right? Oftentimes, those tests don't have anything to do with the change that I just made. But I'm going to run them anyway because I don't know, right? So basically, I mean the burning time or wasting CPU cycles. So Facebook, now Meta, but at the time, Facebook, published this white paper a couple years ago. I'll have a link to all this stuff at the end, QR code that'll get you the slides and all of these resources. But so basically, they produced this white paper a few years ago, and you can read about it here. But the premise is this predictive test selection. So they had a problem with kind of the traditional view. So if you think about a code change, let's pretend our code change is the red diamonds across the bottom, and then my tests are the numbers across the top. So I'm just going to figure out whatever kind of a dependency graph looks like, and I'm going to run all the tests that are affected. Okay, so this is good. This is what we do today often, but there's still potentially a lot of waste. So what this paper describes is a machine learning model that takes into account all these inputs, file names, extensions, things about your source, the history of test runs, all of these things, and feeds it into a machine learning model, and it predicts how likely your test is to pass. And if it's likely to pass, whether you made the change or not, you don't need to run it. Okay, so this is a great thing for productivity, but it probably scares you a little bit, right? Why wouldn't I run my tests? Okay, so there's some caveats here. Okay, so you can use PTS on your local machine as you're writing your code. Maybe you submit a pull request and you use PTS pre-merge pull request. So that's as soon as you submit your pull request, sometimes it kicks off a build. You can use PTS there. But when your code gets merged to your main line, you can still run all your tests, or maybe just the rest of your tests, whatever you want. So that's how you can use this technique to both speed up your build and still have your assurance that all your tests will pass. So many of us are doing something to try to get around this while we're building locally now. Some people I know use JUnit tags. I typically run all the tests that are in a given package, and I'm like, that should be good, right? But this is a predictable model that we can use. All right, I keep picking on Dell in this presentation, so I apologize to them. But they were looking into turning on PTS in their setup, and they realized they could save 41 days within 7 days. So it's 41 days of computation within 7 days, not wall clock time. So it looks a little funny, but they have a bunch of developers, so that's each developer, CI, things running in parallel, those types of things. All right, so moving on to test distribution. So this is the other one I talked about. In our applications, you have a lot of work to do. You distribute them across a bunch of nodes. Is anyone not running their tests right now in parallel? I'm guessing a few of you. I think you should start there. That's a great way. We can talk about that in a minute. But basically, you can think about running your tests in parallel on your machine. That can only scale as powerful as your machine. So we can scale this out now into multiple nodes. So this is how our solution works, but there are other companies that are doing something similar. Basically, you have a pool of workers, right? You can have a Kubernetes autoscaler, or If you have a rack of hardware, you can have a bunch of agents running on your nodes. So essentially, your laptop orchestrates the build. All the data comes back to your build. It looks like one build from your perspective. Your laptop is no longer the bottleneck. Okay, all the coverage data, everything just aggregates back in. So an alternative to this is something called CI fanout. Now, I hadn't heard this term since till I started working at Gradle. I have seen this in practice at a few different places. Basically, you take some long-running task and you break it up. So this is a kind of a Jenkins file that just manually partitions a build 3 different ways. Hopefully, these tasks all finish about the same amount of time. The first one finishes in 5 minutes, the next one in 15, and the next one in 10. You know, that's still a lot of optimization you leave on the table. But the big problem here is this only works for CI, right? If you have a whole team of developers, they're still, you know, running slow builds. Yeah, great, your CI builds are fast, but all your developers are still waiting. So quick recap before we move on here. Caching and PTS are great, but you're still gonna have to run your tests. Running all your tests in parallel on a single machine is still great, but it's still limited by the power of that machine. And CI fanout is a little clunky, and it only works for CI. Okay, so we have all these things. Our builds are super fast now. This is awesome, but our builds are complex, right? Does anyone build look like this? Hopefully not. If you have a problem with your build and you go ask somebody for help, the first thing that happens is you're going to start a game of 20 questions, right? Which OS are you using? Which version of Java, right? Which version of Maven? What's changing your machine? What's different from here between my machine, right? All these things, this is exhausting and it's a waste of time. So we have this thing called build scans. So it's basically a way to, you know, take an X-ray of your build. And you can go to scans.gradle.com and use this. You can use it for local builds, CI builds, all those things. You can share individual links that point to your problem with your teammates. The paid version of our tool, you can actually diff builds. But even if you don't use this, there are other ways to do this. I have a link in my notes that will be in the end here. Richard Fichtner has a survival guide for Maven. Basically goes over a whole bunch of different plugins. You need some way to get that information out of your build. So whatever it is. Okay, so great. So now your builds are easy to troubleshoot. They're fast, awesome. But if you're not paying attention to your builds, they're going to start slowing down, right? So if I sent you a pull request that adds 5, maybe 10 minutes to your build, you might notice, right? Like, what is this guy Brian doing, right? But that's not really what happens. What happens is it's a few seconds here, a few seconds there, right? In a few weeks, maybe a few months, our build times are going to start creeping up, right? So we really need to pay attention and watch for trends. Or maybe you have an office. You have a new office that starts up, right? You have developers that work in that office. They have slower builds, right? Without some kind of data you don't know. Maybe it's just a networking issue. Maybe there's congestion. Maybe you need a cache node, whatever it is. Maybe you move to a new office and your builds are slow because maybe you're connecting back to the infrastructure in your other office. Whatever it is, you need data to know this, right? So has anyone seen this quote before, hopefully? It's an old one. Right? We can observe a lot just by watching. It's really hard to change something without data. So you really need to start tracking these things. Is anyone tracking your local build times? Anyone know how long your builds take? All right. Anyone just ballpark it? Anyone have a build that's an hour? Yeah. Half an hour? Too long you don't want to admit? No. No. Is anyone under 2 minutes? So somewhere between 2 minutes and half an hour is kind of, yeah. So that's kind of what we see a lot. Yeah. You may have a lot of projects.
A lot of deployment releases. GitLab is slow.
Yep.
Sometimes it's very fast.
Yep. So with knowing that information, maybe you can make changes in your process, right? If it's always slow and fast.
We can just add some workers in this case.
Right. But you need some data to know that, to know what to improve, right? But at least you're starting to pay attention to it. Yes.
So what I'm
So what I mean by that is that if you have some kind of like for instance, we have some large monolith, some legacy application, and it takes like enormous time to build. And there's like a bunch of microservices. Some of them take just a few minutes or something, and some of them, as they start growing, they take a lot longer or something. But we're trying to sort of decompose that monolith more and more, but it's kind of hard. So
Yes, absolutely. So, I really feel that you should start thinking about tracking this. So obviously we have a product that does this, but you can do this on your own, right? You could create a Maven extension or a Gradle plugin to, record your build times and stick them in a database or something, and then trying to figure out what to do, and then, work on improving those times. So you need some visibility, right? It's really hard to change these things. If your build's an hour, right? Just the way it is. If you show up tomorrow at a job, brand new job, and your bills are an hour, that's just the way it is, right? Your first thought may not be, well, we should fix this. It may be, well, that's the way it is. Everyone who's been working there, that's just the way it is, right? So it doesn't have to be that way, but we need to start paying attention to these things and tracking it. Same thing for errors, right? So there's probably a whole host of common errors that you see in your builds, right? So you can ask the question, if you had an hour to fix something in your build, what would have the most impact on your team? Again, without some kind of data, we don't know these things. I love to talk about flaky tests. So unfortunately, I put this kind of in the end of my presentation, but I have a whole presentation on testing and the fact that I think it gives us confidence. Flaky tests. So a flaky test is a test that passes once and maybe you run it again and it fails, right? It's unpredictable. So flaky tests erode the confidence you have in your build. They provide us negative value, right? You have a question?
Oh. Where was it? Okay. Oh.
Yeah, so basically integration tests are what you had in mind when you were thinking about
Any
flaky
test that's
tests?
flaky. Integration tests, sometimes there's flakiness depending on what you're doing because of infrastructure. Sometimes there's ways around mitigating that. But basically, any type of problem that, if you run a build and you're not confident that that failure is real or not, that's a flaky test, right? So flaky tests train us to look past, these build failures, right? So what is the first thing you do when your CI fails, right? Does anyone not have flaky tests? No, okay. So what is the first thing you do when your CI fails, right? Do you look at the logs or do you rerun the build? Who reruns the build, right? Everybody. So this means you do not have confidence in your builds, right? And that is the problem. So you're not confident. So now you're just going to click, the run button, right? And you're gonna stick things back in your CI queue. And then you're going to wait. So now you're waiting twice as long. And maybe the build failure was legit, but you don't trust it. So you're just going to rerun it. So if you have a 20-minute build or an hour-long build, you just blew 2 hours, right? Maybe 40 minutes. That's still a long time. Oh, sure.
Whoa.
All right. So Vitautas, I think that's how you pronounce his name, says here, is the build time a real measure of lack of performance though?
That's performance. So developer performance or application performance, or you could go any way with that. So I like to think about productivity, right? So going back to sort of build performance, I usually talk about this every once in a while, but I don't have a slide for this in this presentation. I have an M1 Mac, but the rest of our engineering team has M2 Macs. And they have them because they were able to show data that our application, our builds were faster with M2 Macs. So the whole team got new Macs, right? So the performance of the build actually improved. Their productivity improved, but they did that because they had data to show somebody. And then they ended up with new laptops, right? So that's a win-win all around. You give me a new laptop, I'm going to be happy, at least for 10 minutes. or maybe 10 minutes until I have to, install my suite of tools, and then that's a whole other conversation. But if I didn't answer the question, let me know some clarifications and we can come back to that too. So you need some way of tracking flaky tests. So this is one of our dashboards that we have in our product, but I've worked at places where it was an email thread or a Slack thread. You need some way of sharing this data with your team, okay? At Gradle, we have these things called flaky test days. So at the end of releases, not every release, but often at the end of a release, if we have flaky tests that couldn't be fixed during the normal cycle, the whole engineering team gets together virtually, and then they fix the flaky tests. So that we have a list, we just go down the list. The most flaky tests get fixed first. This does two things. So this stabilizes our build, which is a win all by itself, but it also trains the developers that flaky tests are not good, right? So now we're getting that confidence back into our build. So I mentioned this a little bit. If you have flaky tests and you just click the rerun button and you have CI queuing issues, that just exacerbates that issue, right? So fixing your flaky test issues might actually fix your CI queuing issues as well. All right, some other tips before we close out. We can answer some other questions here in a minute. I was at another jug a couple months ago, and somebody asked about IntelliJ, which happens to be one of your sponsors, right? So they said they couldn't get their company to pay for their IntelliJ license. And this boggles my mind, right? So if you go to a mechanic, that mechanic probably gets some sort of tool allowance, or their tools are supplied to them. You wouldn't expect someone to pull apart an engine without the right tools, right? Why do we expect software developers to write code without efficient tools? Okay, so in the case of JetBrains, they have a whole bunch of resources that can actually help you write a business case to your boss. Hopefully, you don't need that, or maybe you'll win a license today, right? But they have a bunch of great resources, and it's not just IntelliJ, right? These are any tool you need for your job. Your company should provide them, right? All right, so this is hopefully supposed to be funny, but if you want to spend more than an hour a day writing code, you need to block out time in your schedule. All right? So block out a couple hours in a row, right? And that's your focus time. Whatever it is you need to do to focus, have that deep focus, whether it's coding, code reviews, whatever it is, block out time in your calendar. My current gig, I work with a lot of folks in Europe, so it's easy to put that time in the afternoon. My previous job, I worked with a lot of folks that were in California, so it was easy to do that stuff in the morning, right? But block out time, you can get more done. I'm actually a big Agile fan. I think the way we do Agile has some potential problems, but that's a whole other rant I could get to. If you're not getting anything out of your Agile meetings, you shouldn't go to them. Now, your teammates may think otherwise, but I worked at a gig a few years ago, and they had this thing called the rule of 2 feet. And they're like, oh, you can always use the rule of 2 feet. I'm like, what the hell is the rule of 2 feet? They're like, you have 2 feet, dummy. Walk out of the room. Like, oh, that's great. So that sticks with me. But if you don't find a meeting productive, you probably shouldn't be there. But that's a whole cultural thing in your company. All right, so DPE is becoming a standardized practice. I think being productive and happier is a perfect pairing in my book. So with that in mind, I have some free stuff. So if you scan this QR code, hopefully, if I did this right, you will get these slides. You'll have all the resources, all the QR codes, everything I talked about in my presentation will be available there. We also have 2 ways that you can get free stuff. So we have this thing called the Gradle Build Speed Challenge that works with Maven as well. So maybe I shouldn't prefix it with Gradle. But basically, you spend 5 minutes, you take a sample build, and you speed it up. You basically apply some caching to it. You send us a picture of the end through email, and we'll send you a swag box. I think it has a t-shirt, socks, stickers, those types of things. It's really easy. You can get through it. And then we have this other system called Influitive, which is kind of what I have pictured over here. We've basically gamified learning about developer productivity. It's really easy to get enough points for a t-shirt. And it's there's challenges that range from like take a selfie to read a chapter of a book and answer a question to give a presentation, right? A whole bunch of things. You can do whichever ones you like to do. And you can get Lego. I'm a big Lego fan. I don't know if anyone else is a Lego nerd, but we can talk about that later too. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I really dig it, and you can get a free stuff that way. All right. So with that out of the way, does anyone have any questions I can answer and make Barry run around the room? All right. In that case, thank you. I appreciate everyone having me.
So, awesome presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention, you talked about an auto mechanic and the tool.
Yes.
Having been an auto tech in my former life, as I
Okay,
like to
yeah.
say, years ago, I had to buy my own tools.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's wild.
So
No allowance,
it
no
is.
nothing.
The dealerships always had some kind of big equipment.
Yep.
Other than that, everything was on your own.
See, that's wild. Although IntelliJ, so again, your
Yeah.
sponsor,
So-
if you have to buy your license, it's cheaper than your company buying the license for you. So for kind of this reason.
Yeah.
So I think it's like $200 if you buy it. If somebody buys it for you, I'm not a lawyer. Don't listen to me. If somebody buys it for you, you have to pay the company rate. If you buy it yourself, it's a cheaper rate.
Okay.
There's,
Oh, that's
again,
probably
I'm not a
why it
lawyer.
makes sense.
What if you buy it and then get reimbursed?
That
Ah.
falls into the other camp, I think,
Which one?
the corporate camp. So
Ah.
but you know,
Well, I will share with everybody that I pay for IntelliJ and WebStorm, which is JetBrains product for HTML pages and stuff like that. And it's $130 a year for both. I think that, the more expensive one is around $80 for IntelliJ. So for me, it's worth it since I use it all.
yep, I use WebStorm too. When I tinker with WebStorm, and I spend most of my day, or at least that 1 hour a day in IntelliJ.
So, and I have the community edition of PyCharm since I've learned Python, but but in any event, we can.
All right, let me get to
flip back
your
yeah, please.
it's right behind here.
So no questions for Brian?
We can answer questions after. Maybe we'll go get that drink.
Yeah,
I can
exactly.
I'll buy a round, or Grado will, and then.
So yeah, I've done some work with the bill scans when it first came out. Writing for InfoQ, I think I came across. it.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I wrote a news item on it, so
Excellent.
that was fun. So I got to experiment with it. So,
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the programs I write are very small because I'm writing for students
Yep.
and they're just learning. I always get the feeling at a talk of this kind that the kinds of concepts that you're describing would be high overhead for somebody writing very small programs. Am I right, or are there still things that we can use as takeaways?
In like the academic circle, I would absolutely agree with that. We hear this argument a little bit with microservices. Oh, I have a build that's 2 minutes long now because that's so much faster than my hour-long build, right? Well, that's true, but if I could cut your 2-minute build down to 20 seconds, the difference between 20 seconds and 2 minutes is significant, right? So if I stand here and I pull up my phone and I just stare at this for 2 minutes, you're going to do the same thing, right? Or if I just stand there or don't say anything for 2 minutes, you're going to pull at your phone. You're going to be bored right away. Now, 20 seconds, you might wait, right? Maybe. But, if your builds are 2 minutes, that's still in the order of you're going to go do something else. Students specifically, like I think removing any complexity from the equation is a win.
Nobody gets to say anything unless I bring them this.
I guess the point that I was making previously is that, being able to decompose your monolith into microservices has a major advantage in terms of the build speed.
Yes and no, right? So that time is still there. It's just broken apart across different modules. Now, I personally like to break things up because I think that you should break up your code base based on how often things are released. If you work at Google, they have a different philosophy, right? I talked to someone a few months ago that worked at Google and now works at LinkedIn. So they went from Uber monorepo, right? Everything in one repo to a repository sprawl. And it was interesting because he had a view of both of them. And there's pros and cons of both of them. And there's ways to kind of mitigate the risks of both of them. So neither one of them is correct, right? It's just kind of what works best for your application. And your
But if you have a microservice, you only execute the tests that are relevant to that microservice. You don't have to execute maybe tests that 5 different other teams have written in that monolith or something.
Right. But you could structure your monolith so that that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. And with build caching, if you run everything, hopefully you're still only executing the code changes. Right. So there's ways to mitigate that. I don't disagree with you, but there are. It's not a black and white answer.
Okay. Thank you.
You can speed up all your builds.
All right, awesome. Let's thank Brian one more time.
Thanks, everyone.
Of course, there might be some pizza left, and of course, the swag over here. We got the cool keychains, or not keychains, luggage tags from Oracle. And don't forget the coasters. Yeah, good stuff. So anyway, yeah. So I want to resume. Okay, good. Is it sharing on?
Yes, that is shared.
Okay.
You can't read it from here. Sorry.
I'm fine. Yeah, I don't care about that. I just want to be able to advance it. So.
Yep. Just hit next.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. So yeah, so our upcoming events will be here next week. I know it's Thanksgiving here in the U.S., but this is based in Europe. So it is JCon World 2023, and this is a follow-up from their in-person event from about 2 months ago, I want to say. So it's there are free tickets to our members. Just send an email to info@gsjug.org. And I'll send out another reminder as well. Jakarta 1, this is, I believe, the 5th year. It's an all virtual conference. And what's interesting about this, this kicked off in 2019 in September, and it was an all virtual conference before we had the pandemic. So it was actually ahead of its time, as it were, as it turns out. That's on December 5th. And that is also the same day that Jakarta EE11, the milestone 1 version, is being targeted for release. So that'll be, part of the celebration going on. It's a fun day. It's about 12 hours or so, but you can come in and out as you'd like. And then the brand new this year is the virtual Pyara conference, obviously virtual too. That's on December 14th. And yeah, let's see. Yep. Oh, there we go. So maybe this is a shameless self-promotion, but these were provided to me. So I thought it was kind of cool. So, but what's more interesting is the one I got for the Pyara virtual conference, the avatar right there. So I'm wearing my reading glasses, but I thought it was kind of cool. So I wanted to share that. Anyway, upcoming meetings for us. Next month, we have Ronald de Heiser. He's coming out from Belgium, and believe he's going to go to the other Java groups too. I'm not 100% sure, but he has a product called Job Runner. It's RUNR, and it's like a Java cron job type of application. And he's version 6.2.3, I think, is the latest version on that. So he'll be talking about that. And then in January, I'm waiting on details, but Jim Bethencourt out of Houston, he has this product called Refactor First, and it's all about refactoring. Version 0.5.0 - milestone 1, I believe. So hopefully by then there'll be another release, but he's going to present virtually, and which is good because, you never know if it's going to snow here. So I hate to have a speaker come out or try to come out and not be able to come out. So, and we can always switch to all virtual like we did in March of this year. And May 8th, and I have the star there because this is almost set in stone. Billy Corando, who you may remember, presented to us in 2021. I believe on Java 19 or 20, but he's got a talk on Java 21 or whatever, whatever topic he'd like to choose. So stay tuned for details on that. So let's see. And we'd like to reach out to Dmitry Choiko again. He was supposed to speak in September. That was a whole big rescheduling due to the event in New York. So, but like to make sure he comes out, and we'd like to get Mark Heckler to come out, and Trisha G, who's
Yes.
she joined Gradle a few
Yep,
months ago.
yep.
Yeah. So I'd love to have Neil Ford come out here. I've seen him speak 20 years ago. He's awesome. But I think the chances of that are almost, snowball's chance in hell. So, well, yeah. So I mean, it's but it's wishful thinking, right?
Well, you
never
shame these
know.
people that come here too.
Yeah, right.
It's
Yeah,
on YouTube now.
that's right. So have to shame them, right? But yeah, no, it would be great to have those folks come as well. But we'll, our leadership team will continue working on, getting speakers for February, March, April, so on and so on. Okay, our friends of the Garden State Java user group, this is the list of what's coming on. I'll be in Philly tomorrow night to debut my Jakarta EE11 presentation, so I look forward to doing that. And then Brian is going to be giving this presentation on Thursday.
Yep.
Along with Matthew Richards on AI augmented unit tests. Our Chicago folks also the same night. Peter Sullivan's going to talk about temporal and kin plus Carta presentations. I have no idea what that is, but I think that's it. Yeah. Everybody else either may have had theirs or don't have one have one scheduled. So this is for our license to IntelliJ, if you're interested. Now, of course, if you've received a license within the past 6 months, we like to give other people a chance, so, please, if you've already won one, please don't register. But go ahead and do that for the next couple of minutes. Anything else, Barry? Cool. That's it? I see a hand. Yes, hold on. Yeah, I'll go up. I need the exercise, How you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, in the previous slide, I saw Jakarta. It's been a while since I've worked with Java, but is that J2EE?
Yeah.
Or okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, so Jakarta EE is now has evolved from Java EE, or it used to be called J2EE. So basically when Oracle released Java EE 8 in 2017, they donated everything to the Eclipse Foundation. And because of branding, it had to be renamed. That's where Jakarta came from. And that was a community vote, by the way, or, a community process to use the old Jakarta name that came from the Apache Software Foundation from years ago. So, it's kind of interesting, and it's all open source now. So, and a lot of the specs from Java EE are now called Jakarta and the name of the feature itself or the specification. So, yep. So it's really cool. We could talk at the end a little more. So, Paul, anything from you? I'm gonna quiz our leaders here. Yes. Oh, yeah. Good. Yeah. Paul just mentioned this past February, we had some of the students here from Drew. Who are the students here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5. Okay. So yeah, 3 of your fellow schoolmates gave lightning talks for about 10, 15 minutes each, and it was awesome. We'd like to do that again next year. If you're interested, just reach out to Barry or Diana Liparos. Yeah. So yeah, that would be cool, and we can schedule that for next year. So what else? That's it. Guess that's it. We have a hoodie, micro profile. We can give that away tonight already. I know you want a hoodie already. I have the list in my box there, by the way. Who has not won a hoodie yet from a micro profile hoodie? Okay. All right, so let's do it. You want to do your random number thing?
Okay, do we get random numbers from the
No, I was
QR
gonna.
code or?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody who's interested, we're gonna do numbers, right? So.
Yeah.
We'll point to people and we'll go 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And if you're not interested, then we could just say pass. So, interested?
You know,
What?
oh, let me.
Okay.
Sorry, what is it for?
This is for the hoodie.
Hoodie, micro profile. So
Hold that up to this camera
it's
here.
it's the time of year to be. This is the time of year to be wearing one of these. So, so we got these actually back in like March, April, and then I held off on giving them away in the summer because So anyway,
All right. 1, 2.
well,
3. Everybody.
Okay, so we have 6. Okay, so you want to run your thing or you want to?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
We have a few different sizes. I just pulled them out of here.
brand new thing this this meeting. I'm running the I'm running a simulated quantum computing program.
Oh, speaking of which, Barry has published his, what number book is it?
13?
13.
Oh, wow.
13 on quantum computing. That'll be the number. Yes, okay.
Lucky 13.
Yes, exactly.
No, can't run the program. I'll have to go to conventional computing. Give me a second.
All right. Now, if anyone ask her, like, what's the source of entropy for this
Yeah,
random
what
number
is-
generator? Like, yeah.
Our PhD speaks on this whole topic. Everybody have a good time tonight? Come on, you can be more.
Thank you.
Oh, and while we're waiting to, by the way, if anybody has.
The winner is 2. Who's 2? Thank you. Yeah, okay, let's have a hand. There you go.
All right, so with that, if there are no further questions, or anything else, we can talk afterwards, of course.
Still the LJ license.
Yes, I'll run that. I'll do, yeah. And then I'll send the email to the person who wins it. So, yeah, with that, our next meeting is December 12th. I'm sure you'll see emails from me anyway. And thanks for coming out. Oh, didn't do the beer thing here.
Nope.
There it is.
Oh, there you go.
My ending slide.